Welcome to the Sparkbird Podcast. I'm Jenn Lodi-Smith.
And I'm Janet McNally.
On every episode of the Sparkbird Podcast, we share a story of how someone discovered their passion for birds. These stories set the stage for conversations about the place of story in our lives, the benefits of birding, and the barriers and opportunities for our birding community. Each story comes from the Sparkbird Project, an ongoing community science initiative designed to gather, share, and study the stories of people's passions for birds.
Every episode is recorded at Canisius University in Buffalo, New York, and developed in partnership with the Roger Tory Peterson Institute in Jamestown, New York, home to the archives of Peterson, whose own childhood sparkbird experience with a northern flicker sparked not just his career, but a revolution in the democratization of birding with the creation of the Modern Field Guide over 90 years ago.
Hello, and welcome to the podcast. I'm Bill, and I'm here with Jen. Good morning, Jen.
Good morning, Bill.
And what we're going to do today, and over the course of many future episodes, is give you the experience of what it's like to be in the woods, in the field, and on the trail. Each month, we pick a natural history topic, research the science behind that topic, and then take you out to a natural spot and share with you everything that we've learned. But for this special crossover episode, we're going to be doing something, well, pretty different. So Jen invited us out here to Forest Lawn Cemetery in Buffalo, New York. For once, we are actually in the city of Buffalo instead of about a half an hour away, which it seems like we usually are. And we are out here on a cool, slightly rainy May morning. And our target is really to talk about Jen's Sparkbird project, the project itself and the podcast, but also to see if we can spot some warblers, because that is the sexy group of birds that people come here to see at this time of year, right?
And we're right here on Warbler's Ridge as we're talking about them.
Yeah.
Not seeing many right now. I think they're in a different spot this morning, but it's a great place for birds.
So I texted Jen to say that I was going to be about 5 minutes late, and she responded with, "Oh, no worries. I'm surrounded by warblers and
Happy as a clam.
Happy as a
there's
clam.
some right up here now. Oh, and a little downy woodpecker. We're going to try not to bird too much
Yes.
while we are walking here, but
So I checked before we came this morning. So I checked eBird.
yeah.
Now it is May 4. Obviously, May the 4th be with
May
you.
the 4th be with you.
Yes, and just since the 1st of May, 96 species have been recorded here in Forest Lawn, 17 warbler species.
That's amazing. I'm watching a nice black-throated blue right now.
Nice.
Isn't he handsome little pocket handkerchief?
So I do not have my binoculars today. I thought about bringing them as I was getting the mic ready, but I did not want to risk trying to hold the mic and use binoculars at the same time.
All right, well, you know what you're seeing. There's palm warbler over there, y'all.
So Jen is going to be the eyes for both of us.
So for longtime listeners of the Field Guides podcast, you have heard of my family. We are the Hebranks, otherwise known as the Hebrank Situation, and I'm the mom of the group. I'm also known professionally as Jenn Lodi-Smith. I'm a professor at Canisius University. I am a scholar in residence at the Roger Tory Peterson Institute, just down the road in Jamestown, New York, and I am the founder and director of the Sparkbird Project, which we're here to talk about today. And part of that is co-hosting the Sparkbird Podcast. And for the Sparkbird Podcast listeners who might not know him, I'm here with
Bill Michaelek. I am half of the Field Guides. Unfortunately, I used to be 1/3 of the Field Guides, but we've lost one of our hosts, Daniel. He got a great job in Florida, so our listeners will know that. But if you check us out, as I just said in the introduction, we do a somewhat monthly podcast where we pick a natural history topic and then go out and just share what we learned about it. And really what I try to do is imitate what it's like to be out with a group of friends when you're on the trail, cracking stupid jokes, but also learning something from each other while you're doing it. That's what we've tried to do since the beginning. So we talked about the Sparkbird Project on a recent episode.
Yeah, at the end of the grass carp episode,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And you shared your Sparkbird story there, and and Daniel and Steve also shared
Yeah.
theirs. But for the listeners of the Sparkbird podcast, will you start the way we start all of our episodes and share your Sparkbird story?
Sure. Well, I do have to say that before you started the podcast, you and I sat down
Yes.
and we talked about it. And at that time, I don't think I had a Sparkbird
Okay.
story. If I remember correctly, I came to birding late. I came to natural history more to like the botanical wildlife route. Wildlife, you know what I'm talking about, mammals. And with people, little kids are usually interested in snakes and critters and stuff like that. And I got a job at a nature center not too far from here, the Beaver Meadow Audubon Center. And the director at that time was a birder, specifically brought me on because he wanted to expand kind of their program offerings. He didn't want to just focus on birds. And at the time, I was, in my early 20s. I didn't even know birding was a thing. So this was pre-internet. If you were not in that community, how would you know about it? It's not like it was out in media at that time in the late 90s. So part of the job was living at the center. And my first day there, my first morning living in the house, someone knocked on our door at, 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning saying, "Where is the yellow-headed blackbird?" And I had no idea what a yellow-headed blackbird was.
Or why people would be excited about it.
Right. Just like, what is going on? I was totally blown away. And Dave had to explain to me what was happening. The bird had been sighted recently at Beaver Meadow. And this is a rare southern bird. I feel horrible. I don't even know what this westernish bird. So obviously a very confused individual had ended up here in Western New York, but people were coming to see it. And he was the first of many people who knocked on my door looking for the blackbird. And I never even got to see it. But that was my introduction to the birding community. And
that's really great.
I kind of joke that I was dragged into becoming a birder.
Yeah.
I was made into a bird bander because a volunteer had passed away and left money. They wanted to start the bird banding program at Beaver Meadow, so I was sent to be trained. And I just kind of grew into it and grew into the community and something that I love. I do not consider myself like a hardcore birder like many people do, but I love being around them because I always love being around people that know more than I do.
Well, and the enthusiasm. And, I think there's so much of what you're sharing that is really echoed in the stories that we have in the Sparkbird Project so far, that a lot of times people don't necessarily see themselves as birder. They see themselves as like birder adjacent.
Right.
And that's part of what we're trying to do with the project is help expand the narrative of what it means to be a birder, what it means to be somebody who loves birds, that it doesn't just have to be one way of birding. There's many ways we appreciate birds. And of course, when we appreciate birds, then we do the conservation work for them. We learn about them. We're curious about them. We're curious about the habitats that they live in. We want to know what the plants are, the behaviors that we're seeing, and that sustains the birds. It also sustains us. Yeah. It helps us with that process of lifelong learning, engagement, and really just living a purposeful life that's so good for us. And so that's really a lot of what we're doing with the project. I think also that it can happen at any time and in any way, and that people are really an important part of that journey for so many of us. I also am I jokingly say I have my second half of life list. I was surrounded by birds, of course, throughout my life, but really didn't find that until my daughter Maisie fell in love with birds. Really was born falling
I was
in love with born in love with birds.
She was born that way, a genetic disposition.
Yeah.
Have you shared your Sparkbird story?
So I've shared my Sparkbird story on the Sparkbird podcast in our very first episode, but it's not a bird, and the field guides is actually a really important part of that. Maybe we walk up on a little ways up the ridge.
And folks, we should point out we are in, a public spot here. We can see birders around us, so you're going to hear voices. Some of them maybe even be coming over wondering what we're doing.
If we're lucky, maybe we'll ask for one of their Sparkbirds.
Yes. That'd be great.
And I'm going to pass it over to Lauren.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lauren Makienko. I'm the founder and co-chair of Feminist Bird Club Buffalo. Currently in a position at New York State DEC, but it's not affiliated with this club at all. But we do have some programs coming up through DEC that have been sent out through Western New York Birders Club and Feminist Bird Club. My Sparkbird, I was just talking to Jen about this. I don't really have a Sparkbird, but I do have a favorite bird, which is the ruby crowned kinglet. So if we see one today, I'll be super excited.
Mine's probably a favorite bird also, but rose-breasted grosbeak.
My name is Henry Morris, and my favorite bird is the great horned owl.
My name is Rachel, and I would say my Sparkbird is the cedar waxwing.
Hi, my name's Kristen. Favorite bird, there's a lot. My first favorite bird was probably a kiwi. I know, kind of a out there choice. And my Sparkbird was definitely a Kia because one decided to land on my head while I was in New Zealand. And
That's so cool.
It was the best day of my life.
I'm Andy. I don't really have a Sparkbird, but I also like the rose-breasted grosbeak.
I'm Nathan. My favorite bird varies from day to day, but I can't stop thinking about the yellow-throated vireo I saw here last year. It's just like every year I see a new bird that I've never heard of.
Hi, I'm Margot. My Sparkbird is the red-winged blackbird. It's what made me kind of first realize that
birds a lot more details I hadn't been noticing.
Hello, my name is Skylar, and my spark bird is the black-capped chickadee. This is very bold and very friendly, so you can get good looks at it up close.
Hi, my name's Kathy, and my favorite spark bird is the one I hear first thing in the spring. I don't know what it is, but it's the first one I see or I hear is my favorite.
Hi, I'm Stacy. My favorite bird is the scarlet tanager, and I've seen some amazing ones here in Forest Lawn.
Yeah, so my spark bird story is not a bird, it's people. And it started with my daughter, Maisie, really from the earliest age, being in love with birds. We can see her earliest artwork has birds in it. Her just activity and interest before she was even verbal, favorite books, all of that kind of thing, was birds.
And you can't like trace that back to like a person or an event. It just was kind of always there.
No. Favorite
wow,
books,
that's beautiful.
favorite stuffies. She had still has this great blue-footed booby stuffy that my godmother gave her. And at the same time, my older kiddo, Sam, was really interested in nature because of the great work of our friends at Earth Spirit who had come to their school. And so our family was sort of getting interested in nature, doing nature things. We went to Buffalo Audubon for their Superb Owl event because Maisie was particularly into owls at the time.
So we have to explain.
So Superb Owl is on the Saturday before the Super Bowl.
So it's a play
You can do the wordsmithing there. And it's a celebration of owls.
And I have to say, it was a good year or something after he did the first one that I made that connection.
I think it's absolutely fantastic. It makes me smile all the time. We always celebrate Superb Owl. So we went to the Superb Owl event. And when we were there, someone noticed our nerdy nature kids and said, hey, you should really go to Allegheny Nature Pilgrimage. And we said, oh man, this really sounds totally like us. Should we show up? This was before the pandemic. I think it was the summer before the pandemic. And for folks who don't know, Allegheny Nature Pilgrimage, you should absolutely go.
Yes.
It's this wonderful weekend where all the nature nerds converge on Allegheny State Park and celebrate nature and go on walks and talks and programs. And
Southwest New York,
fantastic.
The weekend after Memorial Day every year.
And so we're there on this like super rainy, gross weekend, camping, and there were storms. And we went on a bunch of different programs, and one of them was a walk called The Skeptical Naturalists. And it was a recording just like this of the field guides. And we were hooked. We went home. We started listening to the podcast. We were particularly captivated by the timber doodling episode, and the woodcocks had just come out. It was not the right time of year to look for woodcocks. But as soon as it was the start of the pandemic, and it was what we did. It was every Wednesday. We had been going to the Buffalo Science Museum because they were open late on Wednesdays. We shifted, and we started looking for woodcocks. And it was one of the things that just made life better during the pandemic, and it was because we were so fascinated by this
Looking
episode.
for woodcocks always makes life better, even not during the pandemic.
Another episode drew us to another place where we found a fledgling great horned owl that really got the whole family all right, we can't just have one pair of binoculars. And an episode that y'all recorded during the pandemic at the Roger Tory Peterson Institute brought us on a pilgrimage. We made a pilgrimage to Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and we made a pilgrimage to the Peterson Institute. And that brought us to meet Arthur Pearson, who we have both interviewed on our podcasts, and get connected with him. And one thing led to another. Shortly after we went to the Peterson Institute, we were at Hog Island Audubon Camp. I learned about the idea of spark birds. I said, wow, I want to study those. And it was really sharing that idea with Arthur. Arthur encouraged me to continue the project, to really move the project from idea to implementation. And without his encouragement, it would still be an idea in the back of my head because I thought it was just this sort of fun thing that I was interested in, and I really didn't realize how much other people would be excited by it.
Sure.
So, yeah, so it's all really due to the field guides and to the Peterson Institute. And
that's awesome. Well, I'm glad we played a small part in it. And for our listeners who maybe didn't listen to the grass carp episode, just real quick, I don't want to assume that people know when we say spark bird. I'm sure they can figure it out by now, but let's just say it to be clear.
I didn't know.
Right.
And so I was blown away by this concept of the bird, or really have realized as in studying this, not just the bird, the moment, the experience, the people, sometimes the series of birds, sometimes there's multiple moments. that help us fall in love with birds. And so it's sort of the origin story of how we become a birder.
Yeah. I love that origin story.
We're now walking, we're sort of doing my favorite loop here at Forest Lawn. As a professor at Canisius, I get to walk across the street here every day that I can. I have lots of meetings over here at this time of year.
Meetings at a cemetery.
And so we're going along my favorite little route around the bowl of Mirror Lake. For folks who don't know this cemetery, it is a gorgeous, huge, historic cemetery designed by Frederick Law Olmsted with just wonderful stands of trees, wetlands, amazing birds. I hear it was even better for birds at some point in the past when I was still bird blind.
And so I did look up a little bit. So this has been here since 1849. So folks, this is really an oasis of habitat within the city of Buffalo. Because someone who I was telling just the other day that we were going to be doing this, they're like, Forest Lawn Cemetery, why are you going there?
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's 269 acres here, and it's adjacent to Delaware Park, which is another 350 acres. And I think I might have to correct you because Forest Lawn was here before Delaware Park. So this was not designed by Fred
I thought it was. Interesting. I need to go on one of those history tours that they have here, clearly.
So I thought it was too, though.
Birds. Okay.
So when I was looking up these notes last night, he designed Delaware Park, but he particularly chose that site because Forest Lawn was already here.
Fascinating.
And he knew he could incorporate it. So, folks, I'm sure a lot of the listeners know out there, but Frederick Law Olmsted designed Central Park. Very well-known name in the park history world. But here in Buffalo, he really had free reign and designed an amazing park system that, unfortunately, over the years of Buffalo being developed, they were shrunk, they were changed. But I encourage people, if you're interested in this, to look up the Buffalo Olmsted Parks Conservancy because they have been doing great work for the past couple decades, trying to kind of restore Olmsted's vision of what the parks were here in Buffalo. But to get back to what we were saying, this really is an oasis of habitat surrounded by an urban area. So this is an incredible resting spot.
Yeah, the stopover habitats that we talk about in banding. Yeah,
for
absolutely.
migrating warblers. So this is a hot spot for birders in the Western New York area every spring.
And I feel like every spring this time of year, I meet people who have traveled from across the country to come and bird here. And I feel so privileged to work right across the street from it and to have gotten to know it, and at least the birds of it, so well. Clearly not the history.
Speaking of an oasis of habitat, though, as Jen and I are walking here, we're walking among headstones, and there's a small herd of, 8 deer, less than, 50 feet away?
Yeah, they're just looking at us.
And they're kind of, a few of them are like, am I going to have to get up?
Are they going to feed me? We're not going to feed y'all.
So one of the things that I wanted to be sure to mention, because I did do a little bit of research over the past few days. Jen and I knew we were going to be doing this, and I wanted to kind of inject some of what we do on a typical episode. So I did look into some migration studies. And a little story I have to throw in that I may have said to you before, but, when I do my research, I typically go onto Google Scholar, and I'll type in a general topic and spend a lot of time filtering through studies.
Yes.
Because I'm just looking at the headlines and I'll go through the abstracts and it's a lengthy process. So recently I said, hey, maybe I can use AI to help me out here.
Oh, yeah.
So I typed in, hey, can you give me a list of studies on the dawn chorus? Because we recently did an episode on that.
Finished listening to that.
And it spit out, 8 or 9 studies. And I'm like, wow, this is, and it gives, a very quick synopsis. So it's pretty, I don't want to say easy, but it seemed pretty easy to be like, hey, this is a study that could work on the podcast. Yeah. Well, once I started actually trying to find the studies, like first one, I couldn't find it in Google Scholar. Second one, I couldn't find it. Did a little more searching. And finally, I asked ChatGPT, are these real studies? And it came back with, oh, no, these are just titles of studies that would be similar to studies that are...
That's amazing.
So I learned that you actually have to say, please, only real studies.
Only real studies. All right, students of mine who are listening to this.
Yes. They even had citations for the fake studies. So just a bit of warning out there, folks. So yesterday when I said, hey, can you give me any interesting studies on bird migration? And I had to put at the end, only real studies.
Only
please.
real studies, please.
So that seems to work. But one of the studies it did spit out was just from a few years ago, they looked into black-poll warblers.
Yeah.
And that was one of the warblers that has been sighted here within the past couple of days. So this is a tiny bird. If you're not familiar with warblers, folks, a tiny bird. To me, it's always reminded me of a black-capped chickadie.
Yeah, it's like a black-capped chickadie and a black and white warbler smashed together.
That's a great way to describe it. So it has that black cap that like similar to a chickadie, but then lots of black striping on its sides and backs. This is a bird that spends its time breeding up in the boreal forests, northern Canada into Alaska, and then it travels all the way down to South America. And just a few years ago, some researchers from Guelph, which isn't too far from here in Ontario, they attached tiny light level geolocators. So these are things that record light exposure data. So researchers could then estimate where they were based on the daylight length of where they were. And something that people had suspected about black-poll warblers for years but were never able to confirm, these birds, when they're migrating, they leave northern, western North America. They kind of make this broad arc across North America to the East Coast, where at different points along the East Coast, they will stay for a while and fatten up.
Get chonky.
Yes, very chonky. And then they fly nonstop across the Atlantic Ocean, something like 1,700 miles. So they fly for 2.5 to 3 days without stopping, and then just collapse into South America for their wintering ground. But this is something, like I said, that researchers had suspected, but until this study had never confirmed before.
That's so cool.
So this, here in Forest Lawn Cemetery, where we are, we're a small stopover point on the black-poll warbler's journey to the East Coast. But right now, they're obviously not heading down, they're heading back.
Yeah.
So they have not done a follow-up study tracking them on the
Them
return
coming
journey.
back. Yeah. So amazing. And I think that's one of the things that is so compelling for so many people about the warblers in particular, and all of the migrating birds, but the warblers in particular. They're stunning to look at. Their behavior is interesting, and this epic journey is just really exciting and inspiring. And there's so much that we're still learning and so much that we don't know. And I think a lot of birders, however they bird, are really curious and love how much there is to learn.
And I think that's one of the great things about birding too, is that whatever your interest level, there's so many people that approach birding from different angles. Like some people, they're out there because they want it to add it to their list. They want to just get a new species, and hey, that's great. It's getting them out there. And then there's other people that are out there because they're interested in the ecology of what these birds are doing. And even if you just start out trying to make a list, I think a lot of those people eventually start
and that's part of what we're studying with the Spark Bird Project. So I'm a social scientist by training, and I have for over 20 years been using the combination of stories and then long-term longitudinal data. So like with our banding stations, we will study the people at one point in time, and then we'll follow up with them, right? So at our banding station, we get our old friends that come and visit back, and we collect more data from them. Same with our people. We follow them over time. So we can look at variability in that single time point, or we can look at variability over time. And so part of what we're building with the Spark Bird Project, we're at about 200 stories right now. We want to be at about 500 by the end of this year, and to ideally about 1,000 by this time next year.
Wow.
Because the more data we have, the better the science that we can make. And so we can study the variability. We can study who birds in different ways, what are the different variables that are associated with each other, and that cross-sectional single time point designs. And then with our annual follow-ups to our Spark Bird participants, then we'll be building a corpus of long-term longitudinal data to see how people change over time. But certainly anecdotally, I've read many memoirs of birders now. We do see that evolution. We see that change where maybe people start as a lister when they're a young person, and that brings them to a real conservation mindset. Or maybe some of the work and stories that I've had from our friends at Birdability, this wonderful, and shout out to our Birdability episode with Kat Fribley, wonderful organization working to make sure that birding is accessible for everyone. Maybe something changes in our life and we have to change the way we bird and our approach to birding. And so over time, as we build the corpus of the research with the Sparkbird Project, we'll be able to have, ideally, the dream is decades of data of birders over time, how they fall in love with birds, and then how that carries forward into their lives, the benefits of that. And with the longitudinal data, we'll be able to do some more predictive modeling and actually understand the directionality of some of the, at least somewhat causal effects in a way that we just can't get at in an experimental design.
You're dealing with people.
Yeah, and we can compare them to large long-term longitudinal studies of the everyday population and do some population level comparisons to see the differences in the birders relative to other folks.
And at some point, 5-10 years down the road, when you meet someone who's a birder, you'll be able to predict where they are on the birder spectrum and what kind of birder they're going to be.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, potentially we can do some predictive modeling. Stuff like this can be used.
Oh, you're a level 4 birder.
We can understand, predicting people's behavior. Some of my colleagues can help look in healthcare settings, understanding who's going to be better at medical adherence, whereas who is not, who might need a little bit more support. Sure. To make sure that they're following through with their doctor's recommendations. Those folks who are going to be a sort of an easier time in a given context or need more structured support. And that's part of what the science of personality developmental psychology, that is my background and my PhD work, has been all about. And a lot of that work was really, for me, focused on later adulthood, focused on how the things that we do in our day-to-day lives define us. Historically, a lot of that has been focused on work, on relationships, on family, and trying to shift that framing with the Sparkbird Project to these interests, the things, the hobbies, the passions, the pursuits that for so many people make their lives so meaningful. Here we can look at that for birders.
Before your daughter, developed her love of birds and kind of that bled into your activities, was your work focused on any kind of nature-related? No.
No, absolutely not. My mom's a retired veterinarian, and she had done some field work in veterinary school on Assateague Island. And so I'd grown up in Central Virginia, hiking the Appalachian Trail with my dad. We were in the Appalachian Trail Club. So there was definitely exposure to natural spaces, vacationing on Chincoteague and going to Assateague and seeing the shorebirds there. But I think one of the things that I think my kids have really benefited from that I didn't have was sort of more kid-friendly, approachable exposure to what was around us. I think if somebody I have a field guide from when I was a teen, and I have a checklist in there that I have some heavy skepticism about. But I clearly have a few moments where I had near misses with becoming a birder and had some interest, but never really learned how to use my binoculars properly, never really figured it out. And so...
You were birding adjacent.
Yeah, absolutely. We had some owls that lived in our backyard when we lived in Dallas. Maisie makes fun of me about them regularly because I still don't know what kind they were. And so my work was really very generally focused on identity development. The past 10 years or so, that's been looking at the space of autism and aging, this underserved, understudied community of individuals who have lived their lives with autism characteristics, but not having a language, because autism didn't come about as a concrete diagnosis in their childhood, and so there hasn't been a mechanism for adult diagnosis, and moving away from diagnostic models into strengths-based models and models of autistic identity. That's been sort of the past 10 years, and it's really only been in this past 5 years or so as the kids have brought me into nature and I've continued to learn. That's become a really important part of my research identity because I wanted to find a way to use my skills and expertise on the academic side of my life to give back to that community that's become to me so much to us.
And for our listeners who maybe haven't listened to the Sparkbird podcast, can you just tell them what to expect if they were to?
Yeah, so on the Sparkbird podcast, we really want to celebrate and share the Sparkbird stories of different individuals. So we started the project partly to study the stories, but partly because when I first heard about Sparkbirds, I wanted to read the stories and there was no place to read them. So I could read the stories of famous birders who had made it enough to publish their memoirs. There was one story on, I think like Science Friday or something like that. There were a few accounts here and there, but there were no real repository. And so we wanted to share those stories because through people's stories, we can learn about ourselves and each other more.
You're like StoryCorps for birders.
Yeah, kind of. That's exactly part of the hope with this. And so we have them up on a website, every story that people give us permission to share. But we wanted to broaden that reach. And so my co-host on the podcast, Janet, suggested that we start a podcast. And so I sat down with you and talked about podcasting. And so we start by sharing those stories of our guests. And then from there, we talk about their different roles. We have scientists studying birds. We have social scientists. We have people working in conservation. We have people working in access. We have artists. We're getting ready next week to interview an author. We're interviewing a musician. So really just an eclectic group of folks with the common theme that they love and appreciate birds and how they do that and how that matters to them.
Are there names that the audience might know?
Yeah, so we mentioned Arthur Pearson and Sarah Morris. Dr. Sarah Morris is an ornithologist who studies bird migration, directs the Shoals Marine Lab. She's currently president of the American Ornithological Society and past president of Wilson Ornithological Society. Scott Weidensaul is a wonderful author.
Great episode.
Writing about bird migration. So if people are curious to learn more about that bird migration work, I really recommend his research.
If you're not a birder, you may not know that name, but I feel like many people who are birders, they know Scott Weidensaul's name. But I loved in the interview how he said, like, hey, I'm not a great birder, especially by ear. He said, my hearing is not great. He said, but he just loves to be out there and with the birders.
And I think that's one of the things that I really found amazing about the birding community is there are places for people like Sarah Morris with a PhD in ornithology, and there are places for many stories of individuals, particularly in the 70s, who don't have what in our society we might consider like the traditional educational degree standards, who have made incredible contributions, Scott included, and have added to our knowledge of birds and I think just really to the community itself. Yeah, really love that.
And while we're talking, we're talking a lot about Sparkbirds, but on your website, you also have a place where people can register their Spark Plant stories.
Yeah, so we have a few spin-offs. Spark Plant, Spark Hike. We're also involved in the Lego community and the adult Lego user group. So we have a pilot of a Spark Lego. They have a whole really interesting shared narrative where a lot of their folks sort of have wandered off from Lego, been told that it was too childish, and then as adults they're like, oh wait, I have the money for this, and then get back into it, which I think is really fascinating. Those have gotten a little bit quieter simply because the Spark Bird work has taken off so much, pun intended, that I'm really dedicating more time to that. But if anybody is interested, I would be happy to, especially students listening, I would be happy to mentor that, or if anybody's community would find that helpful. Those adaptations are a lot of fun too.
And the point that I was going to make is that with Spark Birds, with Spark Plants, when I was coming up into the natural history field, pre-internet, pre-smartphones, it was daunting in terms of wanting to know stuff going out with field guides and just doing my best. That is a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
Like, I love doing that. I wouldn't trade that for anything. But I feel now many people that I know within the birding or the botany community kind of to look at the downside of things like iNaturalist or Merlin, these apps that allow people to identify things readily, handily, very quickly. But for me, I feel it's a doorway in for so many people.
Absolutely.
It lowers the wall that used to be there in terms of knowledge, because you don't know what you don't know. Even now, when I fire up iNaturalist or Merlin, there's still times where I'm like, I didn't even think of that species, or it's a species I'd never even heard of before. So to me, these are routes in for so many more people. Where you were talking about the birding community, and I've always found the birding community generally be very welcoming.
Most of them.
Yeah.
With a few notable exceptions.
Yes. I mean, you can say that about any highly specialized group, right? Very eccentric.
Yes.
Right? It's always interesting. But yes, there are some people that we'd rather not pay attention to, but I've always found in almost any birding group, people that want to share their knowledge with you and are ready to help you along in terms of what you know. But, you know, I'm one of those people that am more comfortable going out by myself or with a very small group of friends. And to me, for people like that, I feel things like iNaturalist and Merlin are just this wonderful way where you have an expert in your pocket.
Yeah.
And I know there's going to be people out there saying, well, those things are wrong a lot. Yes, they are. But I was also wrong a lot when I was going out with my field guide by myself, right?
And we can have that healthy skepticism. I always tell people we're getting ready to, right after we record this, we're doing a spark walk where people bring their bird curious friends to
I love that, bird curious.
To learn and to do a little birding 101. And I always tell them about Merlin. I always give them the caution that my mother-in-law's screen door is a peregrine falcon. And so to have a healthy dose of skepticism, make sure all your settings are right.
What about the peregrine falcon?
My mother-in-law's screen door is a peregrine falcon.
Oh, the noise it makes.
According to Merlin, yes.
That's okay. My Keens, when they're wet, they're a northern cardinal.
Excellent.
Yes.
See, and these are great, like easily understood examples for people to make them say, oh, all right, let me think. It's a really great tool to learn from. There's a bunch of other great tools. And so when I hear people discounting it, I often say, well, okay, but do you use Duolingo? You know, and if you're using Duolingo to learn a language, it's not that different. And these tools help bring people. And I think one of the things that you said in your Sparkbird story was that you didn't even know birding community existed.
Right.
And I've heard a number of our participants say that they were really surprised that, oh my gosh, there are other
this
people
whole
like
world
me.
is
This is amazing. And that generativity of sharing of knowledge, the intergenerational connections that we see in the community. I think that is one of the spaces where I would love these apps to do more of. So
I feel
we're
iNaturalist
already doing, like, we've got those place locations in eBird or in Merlin. Like, let's say, all right, so this one has an education center and this one has, you know, outings. And so a way to be able to overlay the ways to connect to other people within those online systems. And there are some online communities that are being built and, you know, local groups and stuff, but creating easier access into those spaces.
I feel iNaturalist has that built into it because it is based on a community confirmation system.
Right.
I've had sightings confirmed by people that go out of their way to write down, hey, this is what you called it, but that would have these characteristics. And if you look at your picture, they take their time to explain.
Right.
There was one great story where a bunch of us went out for a hike at Iroquois National Wildlife Refuge, not too far from here, and we found a small mammal that none of us could identify. We thought it was some kind of mole. We weren't sure what it was. We took a picture. I put it up on iNaturalist. I think I just put mammal or something like that. And this one individual wrote a long paragraph, very long, several paragraphs, about how it was a hamster. He had done research with hamsters, so he knew it was a hamster, and he explained why it was a hamster. And he obviously explained it was probably a pet that somebody really... But I would never have known that without iNaturalist and this man, generous man, taking time, right?
I love that. Now, from iNaturalist, have you ever then connected with any of those folks in person?
I
Like
have
gone
not.
on a, because I think that's the next step,
Right.
right? Is how can folks go be in community in person with those individuals, creating opportunities for, gathering and learning
Sure. You know what?
in other spaces.
I do have to correct myself because this was 2018, 2019. I went down to Puerto Rico with my family, and, the rainforest there, I'm snapping identifications like crazy. And there was a botanist based at a university there who every day would go through several of my sightings.
Oh, that's awesome.
And we traded messages, and I let him know that we do a podcast and that I would love to come down and interview him, go on a walk with him through El Yunque. So that may happen at some point in the future because of iNaturalist.
I think that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That needs to happen.
Right?
All right. Stay tuned for that one, y'all.
And one thing I want to be sure I don't forget to mention, I just discovered in doing research for this episode, Jen, have you heard of D-Bird?
D-Bird, yeah. And it's Bird Mapper, where you report birds that have died. I use it mostly for collisions with our building over here on campus. I actually did that right before I came here. I went and checked for dead birds, and so great resource for reporting bird mortality. I reported it once for a bird that flew into our car too.
So you said Bird Mapper?
I think it's Bird Mapper is the other one. We can put it in the show notes.
Okay, so I didn't realize there's two.
Yeah, there's two. I report to both. They're on the Western New York Young Birder Club website. I'm also the mentor of our local Young Birder Club, which my daughter Maisie and my older kiddo Sam started because of a lack of something like that in our area. And they've put together a bunch of great resources from partly a project that Sam did for school, partly just our own research on the Lights Out initiatives. A student at Canisius had done a thesis on the local impact, literally, of lights on our bird community and the millions of birds that die from colliding with buildings. And then also cats in, lights out, what we've been saying. And so, those bird mortality, reporting them on D-Bird and Bird Mapper.
I had no idea what was going on.
Yeah.
And whoever came up with the website name D-Bird.
Isn't that great? Yeah.
They deserve a raise.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a useful thing to be able to document. We did that on campus. I've been doing that for about 4 years now and have identified a couple of problem areas. One of the problem areas was, and not major, it was, a few birds a year. It wasn't, like some, great blue heron flying down right in front of us. That's great. It wasn't like, some of the horrible mass casualty events that we hear about in the news. But we had a spot that, a few birds a year, each migration season, were dying. And it was at our library. And I mentioned it to our library staff. They started closing the blinds on those windows, and we haven't had a mortality there since. So super easy fix that has saved, probably a few dozen birds at this point.
Right. But for the listeners who may not be aware, the two issues that we're talking about, the Lights Out initiative and bird collisions, these are just two areas that the general public may not be totally aware of, but they have a large impact on bird populations, especially in urban areas. They can affect migration, just leading to a lot of mortality, bird injury. And we'll put some information into the episode notes about this if you want more information. I know the Buffalo Audubon Society here just had a symposium just a couple days ago on creating bird-friendly cities.
Yeah, it's great to see some local work moving forward on that. The other piece is the cats, both outdoor domestic cats and feral cats, and the
massive impact.
Massive impact.
Yes.
And the latest research on that sounds like the huge estimates are actually underestimates. Like, I always have to check those numbers and make sure that I have them right when I was first putting together information on that. And it really sounds like from putting GoPros on cats, they're even more vicious killers than we had previously understood. But it's a hard conservation topic because, of course, there are many people who care deeply about their cats, and there's some really interesting work from the social science conservation community on bringing communities together to have conversations about how different groups with different opinions can come to a common understanding and come to work together for sort of the broader benefit of the community. It's a really great example of where social science is connecting with conservation work.
Yeah.
And we can put some examples in the show notes for that as well.
Yeah, I love cats. I just hate them outside.
Yeah.
I think it's important also to drive home the fact that even though to people like us, cats being outside and the impacts they have on birds may seem like an obvious connection to make, but just this past week, our neighbor, they've had an outdoor cat, and their cat recently killed a blue jay in our backyard. And she heard me yelling at the cat to get out of our yard.
Yeah.
And she asked my wife, she's like, "Oh, Bill doesn't want the cat in our yard?" Linda said, "Well, he's killed some birds." And she's like, "What? He's killing birds?"
Oh my goodness.
Just had no idea that their cat was doing this.
So he probably wasn't bringing anything home. They had no behavioral evidence.
Right.
And, I think that's part of where these underestimates are coming from. And so once we can see that, maybe she needs a catio. Catios are these sort of indoor, outdoor porches, screened-in porches or glassed-in porches where cats can observe their natural spaces, feel a little outside, but without, and it's it's not just birds, right? It's,
oh, sure.
Yeah, that's probably most of it, but.
And my wife and I have had cats for years. We're a foster home for cats, but keeping cats inside is better for cats as well.
Absolutely.
This is a whole series of podcasts unto itself, but people say, "But my cat loves to be outside," and kind of my snarky response is, "Well, people love heroin too, but it's not good for them." So, it's your job as the owner to do what's good for them.
Absolutely. There's a lot of risks for cats out there too.
Right. Cats that stay inside, they typically live longer, healthier lives. So.
Other big ones are rodenticide, right? As we stand here in Forest Lawn, rodenticide took out one of the great horned owls here a few years back. And Flaco in New York City was another famous example of a really charismatic bird that was killed by rodenticide. So for our birds that are predators, that bioaccumulation of the chemicals from the rodenticides causing neurologic damage and eventually death in birds. Our pesticides, likewise, for the impact on insects directly and birds over time. And that's one of the things that as we talk about bird-friendly communities, it's not using those products, it's keeping our windows safe, it's planting all of our amazing native plants and learning more about that. And that's a whole area that I feel like I am just beginning to understand. And it's also just helping other people fall in love with birds.
Right.
Is part of our responsibility, bringing our neighbors to understand and see and learn more. And so I think that's one of the messages that we've really been trying to communicate with the Sparkbird Project is when we look at the data that we have so far, and again, we only have 200 stories. The majority of our stories so far are from folks on the East Coast, particularly New York, with a scattering of other stories from around the world. So we want to use some caution in interpreting what we've learned so far, and there's a lot of the data that I simply won't crack until we've gotten a more representative sample. But one of the things that we really have learned so far is that there's not a particular species of birds. It really stands out as the most common sparkbird. That was one of the questions that I've gotten a lot. I've read published accounts of people saying, "Oh, it's absolutely this bird is the bird that makes people fall in love with birds. It's the most common one." And of course, there's no evidence that they can cite on that. It's just their own sort of data. Yeah, there's some clusters of cardinals and jays and the stuff that's around and sort of noisy and we pay attention to. But more than anything, it's people. Over 2/3 of our sparkbird stories have an interpersonal component where it's a friend, a family member, a teacher who gets us out doing those experiences that help us say, "Whoa, look at that. That's really neat. I want to learn more." It's somebody giving us a field guide, giving us binoculars. And so that's part of our responsibility as people who care about birds and care about conservation is to help make more birders. And so when I'm out on a walk, I'll show a kid a cool bird through my binoculars. I'll show them how to use binoculars. I go up to random people and point out cool things around them. We give out field guides that people donate when we're tabling for the Young Birder Club. And watching a kid walk away with their nose in a field guide, just like lit up, so excited about discovering the birds, it's magical, it's transformative.
Don't you guys also have something set up where people can like recycle gear, birding gear?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a birding gear free cycle where folks can donate gently used stuff, and we can pass that along. And we got a pair of binoculars to a local young person who had financial need for that, and their teacher reached out and said, hey, I've got somebody who really loves birds but can't afford gear.
Because that is an obstacle.
Absolutely.
I mean, because folks, if you haven't gotten hard into birding or gotten hard into binoculars, I do have to say, like, a good pair of binoculars, holy cow, it makes such a difference.
Our old pair that was like our first starter pair picked up to use the other day just because everything else was out in the car. It was awful.
Right?
I don't know how we ever saw anything.
You didn't know
I'm
better.
Spoiled now. So that access, having field guides, having binoculars, travel is another important theme that we're seeing in these stories. And not everybody gets to do that. So creating those opportunities is really, I see, one of our responsibilities as birders, one of my responsibilities as director of the Sparkbird Project. And hopefully, as we start to publish this work, that will allow our community partners to say, here's evidence from the Sparkbird Project, take that to their grants, their funders, to be able to provide more access and more resources and continue to create more people. But it's amazing how many people love birds, and you start to, hear this random person, this random famous person, it's talking about birds, and that's fantastic. It helps that what you were saying, moving it from sort of something esoteric that you don't hear about to something that's now in popular culture.
Yes.
Right? And that helps more people come in to understanding and creating that next generation, or creating opportunities for folks in later adulthood to discover that interest
definitely.
in them.
Yeah, don't think birding has to start when you're young.
Nope.
Right? Now, we've covered a lot of ground here, but I'm going to put you on the spot here. Do you have a great Sparkbird story that someone has submitted that just kind of sticks out in your head as like a highlight?
So one of my all-time favorite Sparkbird stories actually came before I was even collecting data. And maybe this is like primacy type effect. And it's one of the first ones that I heard. I just asked our local Facebook group for some of their stories. And I had someone share that they had some access barriers to having the right prescription for their eyeglasses. And they walked out of the ophthalmologist for the first time with their new glasses, and they saw a starling. And they were struck by the beauty of the starling. So I love that one, partly because it has this access. It has this very common bird, all of the problems with starlings notwithstanding. And then it sparked curiosity. It sparked them to go get a cheap pair of binoculars and a field guide. And that just one powerful moment. Of course, I love Roger Tory Peterson's story of the northern flicker as a young child, seeing this flicker and its beautiful feathers, creating that lifelong passion. But I think one of my others was a retiree sitting on his porch, drinking his morning coffee, and a belted kingfisher came flying across, caught a fish, sat on a branch, and then started whapping the fish against the branch, and he was just so fascinated by the behavior. Yeah. So I think those three really stand out to me, partly because they're different points in the lifespan, partly because there's this just curiosity and wonder in each one.
Awesome.
Yeah, and we always try to wrap up with our guests by having them share a little bit more about how to find y'all. So how can the Sparkbird podcast listeners find the field guides?
So we're on social media. Most people now seem to find us through YouTube. You can listen to our episodes there or wherever you get your podcasts. We do have a website, thefieldguidespodcast.com. But we bring out episodes. We try once a month. That's usually every other month or every 3 months, but we'll see how we do this year. Our latest episodes are on the dawn chorus. that annual explosion of birdsong early in the morning. Just fascinating stuff. So check us out, please.
And for the Sparkbird Project, you can find us at spark-bird.org. And the podcast, you can just search your favorite podcast provider for Sparkbird Podcast. We want to close by thanking the Roger Tory Peterson Institute for their continued support of the Sparkbird Project and for being one of the connections between us and the field guides.
And I want to thank Jen for suggesting that we get out today and do
And thanks for all the advice on starting the podcast. A year and a half ago, I think we started that conversation. Much appreciated and glad we finally got out here.
Our pleasure. So folks, check out the Sparkbird Podcast and the Field Guides Podcast, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Sparkbird Podcast.
A reminder that every story shared on the podcast is part of the Sparkbird Project, an ongoing community science initiative designed to gather, share, and study the stories of people's passion for birds. Research findings go directly back to community partners to inform their efforts towards inclusively sparking and sustaining birders. Share your story and participate in our community science effort at www.spark-bird.org today.
Many thanks to our producer, Kayla Gajewski, for the recording and editing support of the Sparkbird Podcast, Genevieve Fontana for the Sparkbird logo, Hustalonia for our theme music, and the Roger Tory Peterson Institute for their support of the podcast. We'll see you next time.